what's interesting, Keith, is for some reason this seems to be a new theme in some of the work that I'm doing, is that people are so busy and the volume of work they have is just crushing.
Yeah.
And so they'll say things like, I can't do anything well. And we all have, most of us don't want to do things badly. If we're going to do it, we want to do it properly, at least. Maybe we don't do it beautifully, but we want to do it properly.
Yeah.
And people are feeling like, I can't even do things adequately. And I feel bad about myself because I don't have the time to do good work. And so I think the question for us is, that's not sort of emotionally sustainable to be, unhappy with ourselves every day. And so how do we change our workload? And what can we discard so that we can focus on things and do the right work and do the right work well?
Hello, and welcome to Student Affairs Now. I'm your host, Keith Edwards. Today, I'm joined by a higher ed leader, human resources expert, and my favorite Chronicle of Higher Education contributor, Allison Vaillancourt. I'm so excited to discuss so much with you to talk broadly about using our time strategically, both personally and organizationally. Student Affairs Now is the premier podcast and online learning community for thousands of us who work in, alongside, or adjacent to the field of higher education and student affairs. We release new episodes every week on Wednesdays. Find details about this episode and browse our archives at studentaffairsnow.com. Today's episode is sponsored by Simplicity, a true partner. Simplicity supports all aspects of student life with technology platforms that empower institutions to make data-driven decisions. As I mentioned, I'm your host, Keith Edwards. My pronouns are he, him, his. I'm a speaker, consultant, and coach, and you can find out more about me at keithedwards.com. I'm broadcasting today from Minneapolis, Minnesota, at the intersections of the ancestral homelands of both the Dakota and the Ojibwe peoples. And now to you, Allison, thank you so much for being here. It's a real treat for me to be able to talk with you after reading from you and sharing things that you've done over so many years. So I'm really glad that you're here. Why don't you tell folks a little bit more about what you have been doing, what you are doing?
Sure. So Keith, my pronouns are she, her, hers, and I am talking today from Iowa City on the ancestral lands of the Iowa, Meskwaki, and Sauk people. So thank you, first of all, for inviting me to join you. I'm thrilled to be here. I love your podcast. So I, after about a 30-year career in higher education, I joined the other side. I joined a consulting firm called Siegel. We're about 1,100 people, and we have offices throughout the US and Canada. And I'm a vice president and senior consultant with the organizational effectiveness practice. And so I think of my work as amplifying the potential of people and organizations. So it is incredibly meaningful work to go into organizations, learn about their culture, help them reduce complexity, increase kindness. So we don't always bill it, we don't always market it that way, but that's sort of, what I'm hoping to do is to make more compassionate workplaces, make things easier for folks. And we do everything from organizational redesign to executive coaching to inclusive policy design. So we offer a very broad range of programs and services. And I come to this work, as I said, after a career in higher education. My first job ever was as a research program administrator for cancer research trials at the University of Wisconsin. Moved from there to the University of Colorado, where I had HR roles and eventually became chief of staff to the president of the University of Colorado system, and then moved to the University of Arizona, where I had several roles. My last role was as vice president for business affairs and HR, and I was also a faculty member in the School of Government and Public Policy. So I think that grounding in higher ed makes me super practical when I'm working with clients, because I don't talk from a theoretical basis. I talk about what I've seen actually happen before.
Yeah, great, on the ground. And I know you've had all these roles, and I came to learn about you through pieces that you've written in the Chronicle. And I don't think it was the first piece that I read of yours, but you wrote a piece about the 22-hour pinata, and it's very short and we'll link to it in the show notes. But I remember reading this and being like, this is kind of a fun story. And then it got to the end and the kicker, and I just went, this is me. I do this all the time. Oh no, I felt so seen and so validated, and also like so called out in a really great way. So And I have shared that piece. I have talked about it in workshops. I just think it's so brilliant and so many people connect with it. So tell folks who haven't read it, and we'll link to it in the show notes, like I said, but tell us about the story of the 22-hour pinata.
Yeah. So my daughter was one of my younger daughter was in high school, and she was taking a Spanish class. And so one of her assignments was to create a pinata. And and if you've made pinatas before, but you take tissue paper and pencils and glue, and you just this very tedious process. I mean, I admire homemade pinatas so much after seeing how long they take to make. But anyway, she starts this big project, and she was going to make a butterfly, and it looked ambitious to me when she started. And after an hour, she just was in despair because it was obvious that given the ground she had covered in 1 hour, it was going to probably take her 16 more hours to get this project done. And she had the weekend to do it. And I said to her, it's just a pinata. Like, maybe you should stop, redesign the pinata, make it a smaller pinata, or you could just not even do the pinata and focus on your other homework. And I got such a tongue lashing from my daughter for suggesting that she be a slacker. And, you know, she's one of these kids who really wants to do, she's not a kid anymore, but he really wanted to do well. And she was so insulted by my guidance to just, you know, lighten up. Well, it didn't take 16 hours more. It took a total of 22 hours. And what was interesting about this process was she could have, you know, the point of the project was not to spend 22 hours making a pinata. It was to understand sort of the art and the craft of making pinatas and how hard it is. But you didn't have to prove it by doing it for 22 hours, but she did. And it got me to thinking about all the other 22-hour pinatas we have in our lives. And so we spend way too much time fussing over an email message or perfecting a presentation that where the slides go quickly. You know, or designing a project plan. And so that was the question, is what is your 22-hour pinata? And should you be investing as much time as you actually are?
Yeah. And I remember reading that and just thinking, oh, I do that. Like, it wasn't do it or not do it, although that's an interesting question. But it's also like, maybe instead of a butterfly, you make something way easier.
Or a baby butterfly.
A baby butterfly, something small or something that's just round that can be so easy with fewer moving parts. And I so resonated with that overachiever, got to get it right, don't want to, you know, have any regrets. And your daughter. And then there's sort of the wise mind, which was your voice, particularly at the end, saying, we could have just skipped this. You could have done other homework that was more substantive. We could have had dinner with that other family we really enjoy. That this was not. And I think about all the things that could be relatively simple that I make complicated and blame other people for how complicated they are. And then this just is like, no, you did that, right? Nobody asked you to make a 22-hour pinata. You decided butterfly, and you decided it had all of these colors, and you decided it had to be done this way, that there was a simpler path. And so I think about that all the time.
What do you blame other people for? I'm so curious.
Oh, why is my boss having me spend all this time on this when my boss probably never intended for me to spend all my time? I made it complicated. I decided it didn't have to be 2 pages, but a 12-page report, including all the data and all the things and references to all of this and all of that. And now I'm blaming my boss when in reality, I expanded the scope and the complexity because I didn't want to be criticized, or I didn't want to let anyone down, or I needed to prove to myself that I was good enough. That inner critic kind of coming in there. And I fall so easily into more.
You know what's interesting, Keith, is for some reason this seems to be a new theme in some of the work that I'm doing, is that people are so busy and they have the volume of work they have is just crushing. And so they'll say things like, I can't do anything well. And we all have, I mean, most of us don't want to do things badly. If we're going to do it, we want to do it properly, at least. Maybe we don't do it beautifully, but we want to do it properly. And people are feeling like, I can't even do things adequately. And I feel bad about myself because I don't have the time to do good work. And so I think the question for us is, that's not sort of emotionally sustainable to be, unhappy with ourselves every day. And so how do we change our workload? And what can we discard so that we can focus on things and do the right work and do the right work well?
Right. I talk a lot about this in workshops around, hey, you've done this thing and this strategy, and how are you going to assess it? And people immediately jump to like a pre-test and a post-test and IRB approval and all of this stuff. And I'm like, how about you just ask on index cards how it went? And they go, oh, like let's not do that. And I think it reminds me of Greg McKeown's book, Essentialism.
Yes, yes.
And I often do an activity with organizations saying, what could you or your organization stop doing or spend a lot less time, energy, and effort doing? And people have thoughts about that. They have ideas, often things they've never shared. And I think just putting some of those things on the table for us to discuss, like, do we have weekly reports with 12 questions that could maybe be 2 questions? Could this meeting that we do every week be every other week? I mean, just small little things like that can really free up time and capacity. And you mentioned the emotional overwhelm, but also the time overwhelm. And just spoke with someone this morning who said, I was in meetings every hour of every day, and then I go home and do my work on nights and weekends.
Yeah.
And you can do that in short bursts occasionally, but if that's the regular practice, it's not sustainable.
Well, it is the regular practice for so many people.
Yeah.
It really is. I was actually talking to someone today who was having their first vacation in 4 years coming up, and works 7 days a week. And, he's very passionate about his work and he wants to do a good job. And I said, it's not sustainable to do this. And are you really doing your best work if you're just working all the time? Because you're not fresh, you're not energized, you're dedicated for sure. But I said, what if you just made yourself take some time, during the week to go see a play or meet a friend for, dinner, and just come back and maybe feel refreshed, maybe you'd be better. And he's like, oh, I wish I could, but I'm so busy. I'm like, yeah, I know. But you have to break the cycle sometimes.
Right. I was just telling folks when my children were born, I was fortunate enough to get 6 weeks of parental leave. And I remember thinking, I was working nights and weekends and scrambling and hustling, and I was so important. I was so critical to so many things. And I remember thinking, there's no way that they're going to leave me alone. And so I was setting up like all of these things, like all these boundaries and how I was going to navigate when they emailed me and when they called me while I was away on my leave. And I was going to be really good about not getting caught up in things. And I wasn't going to be working 4 hours a week. And I really was like, how am I going to do this? They never called me once. They never called me once. And when I went back, they were excited to see me and they were appreciative. People had covered, right? So they're glad to have me back. But it was such a great reminder when it was like 5:45 and I felt like I needed to do this thing. Like, no, they made it 6 weeks without me. I'm not the linchpin that I have told myself that I am. So maybe I could take a vacation. Maybe I could go home at 5:30. Maybe I could do some of these things.
So it's so interesting that you say that, because it reminds me of a story about a speaker came to campus one time, and her name's escaping me. I'll try to remember it, but because she's amazing. But she talked about what women do when they go out of town. And she's telling the story about this woman that she knew who would lay out all the kids' clothes for the week and then make all the dinners for the week. And everyone is laughing. And I'm thinking to myself, doesn't everybody do that? Because I would leave and I would, on the dining room table, there'd be Monday clothes, Tuesday clothes, Wednesday clothes, and all the food is in the refrigerator. And she said, what message are you sending to your partner and to your children about the competence of the father in this case, or the partner in this, father or partner? And I'm like, oh my gosh. So I went home that day and I announced to my husband and to my children that I wasn't going to do that anymore, because it was insulting to their dad that I was doing this. He was very capable. And from now on, they were going to be, he'd be taking care of them. And one of my daughters started to cry. And she said, but Mom, he'll make us eat meat. But what happened as a result of that is they created crepe night,
Oh,
which they carried on for years and years and years.
wow.
And so they liked my cooking better, mostly because I'm more of a short order cook than he ever was. But they established some really beautiful traditions
Yeah.
about crepe night and
Yeah.
ways to get through, and they could just wear whatever they liked, and it was good. So it was
Yeah.
a really good lesson for me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I really appreciate the gendered nature of that. The flip side of that is I remember listening to a college president talk and talking about how he managed. Someone said, how do you manage all the pressure and all the things? And he talked about how one of the things he really loves to do is fold laundry.
Hmm.
And you could hear the room swoon, like
Hmm.
just audibly, like, oh. And just the fact that the president folded laundry was just like, oh my gosh, what a guy. Right. And so how different the gendered expectations are, at least in these two different examples, where when she goes away, she has to do all of these things and manage all of this, and
Yeah,
that's just expected. Whereas when he folds some laundry,
it
it's
gets
like,
praised.
oh my goodness, how exceptional. So
Yeah. But it makes me think about what you said about getting all your systems in place so that
mhm.
everything is covered. Is in some ways, what message does that or did that send to your team that I don't really trust that you can't contact me because I'm so important,
Yeah,
rather than say, I trust you, see you in 6 weeks. Let me enjoy
yeah,
my new baby.
yeah.
Yeah.
Well, they sent that message for sure. They were like,
Mhm.
we're fine without you.
Mhm.
Um, One of your recent pieces, I mean, I don't know when that 22-hour pinata, but I've been talking about it for at least 6, 7,
2013,
2013.
yeah, yeah.
Okay. So 10 years.
Uh,
And I've probably been talking about that whole time. One of your more recent pieces in the Chronicle really focuses on meetings. And this
mhm.
is the 22-hour pinata. If folks want to, it's a few paragraphs. It's very short.
Right,
Um, this meeting piece is quite extensive about how
right.
to have better meetings with a lot of good thoughts and about framing, but also some tactical things. So many of us spend most of our time in meetings. Most of us lead meetings. We're in meetings. We talk about how this meeting could have been an email.
Right, right.
But then we also complain about having too many emails. So we can maybe
Mhm.
circle around to that. How would you suggest what would you suggest about how we can make meetings better uses of our time?
Well, it's interesting. After having been when I was in higher ed for a long time and I had senior leadership roles and I was in meetings all day long, like,
Yep.
most people are. And I thought, I'm so important. I'm in meetings all day. And then I would, you do all the work that's created by the meetings at night or on the weekends. And then I joined a consulting firm where you don't get paid to go to meetings. You get paid to do work.
Mm,
Right, with things that deliverables. I mean, you
mhm,
might have a client meeting, but it's every hour is being billed,
mhm,
and it gave me a whole new perspective on meetings.
mhm, mm,
And back when I was in universities, I'd estimate people's salaries around. You've done this before. You estimate everybody's
yes.
salary. This meeting cost $2,500. Um,
Yeah.
I think about it for myself, like, what am I doing with this meeting? And so I really think that we should think about, just because we've always had meetings, do we really need to have these meetings? Right.
Mhm,
And you asked some important questions at the beginning, like, do they have to be so frequent? Do they have to be so long?
mhm,
Does everybody need to be there? But
mhm,
meetings are so political, right? Even though we complain about going to meetings, if we get disinvited from a meeting, then we feel
mhm,
very disrespected.
mhm.
And so how do we make it a gift to be disinvited from a meeting? Or do you
Yeah.
just stop the meeting and start a new meeting so people don't feel like they've
Yeah.
been, removed from the meeting? I don't know. Have you ever been disinvited from a meeting before, Keith?
Yeah. Here's what I find. I find that in particularly student affairs folks, we can fall into includer in the basement where we just
Mhm.
add, so
Yeah.
no one's feelings get hurt. And then we're so reluctant to cancel meetings. Like, I don't know if we have enough, but I don't want to cancel. I don't want people to feel like their time's not valuable. And so I find that leaders are so reluctant to cancel meetings. And then I ask them, what happens when you're invited to a meeting and the meeting gets canceled? Oh, it's a joy. It's a thrill.
Yeah.
It's so grateful. I'm so appreciative. I'm like, okay, so we're going around so hesitant to cancel
Yeah.
meetings or uninvite people to meetings. And when we're invited to a meeting, we get uninvited.
Right.
It's like, fireworks. Like, this is amazing. I get an hour back of my life. Now I can work and not do it in the after hours. So
Yeah.
cancel more meetings.
Yeah, I do think, I mean, it's so hard to get people's calendars. And so if you think that you need a regular meeting, I think calendaring it, but always saying we'll only meet if we need to. And I will try to give you advance notice because, I'll be honest, when I get a meeting canceled the hour before the meeting, I'm relieved and I'm also annoyed because I could have scheduled a very different day if I'd had more notice.
Great point.
So yeah, I would say that. But in the article, it's a guide actually, this Chronicle piece. It is very long. I asked 5 key questions. Can I go over the questions?
Yeah, please.
So I say when you're thinking about meetings, ask yourself 5 questions. So one is, what am I actually trying to accomplish with this meeting? And there are lots of things that we can accomplish, right? Are we trying to make a decision? Are we trying to share information? Are we trying to celebrate something? Are we trying to get diverse perspectives? What are we trying to do there? And we can talk about more of that if you'd like to. Who should be invited to the meeting? What's the best way to structure this meeting? The meeting structure is so important. What bad things could happen in this meeting? And how can I anticipate them and manage them? And then what are the best ways to make decisions and move forward? And then like a bonus question, which is how can I make the next meeting even better? So those are a few of the questions that I cover in the guide.
Have you thought about, I love the structure of the meeting. You were making me think about the importance of where meetings happen. And I'm thinking about on college campuses, what building, because the geography of a campus has meeting. What does the room look like? How is the room set up? Is it a classroom? Is it a boardroom? Is it a conference table? Have you thought about the meeting location and how that affects meetings?
Yeah, I mean, I think that people like to the degree it's possible, people like to meet in nice spaces, and they behave better when they're in nice spaces. That's true. Just something that I've noticed before. Have you noticed that?
I have. I do a lot of speaking, and it's very different when you're in a gym and you got a bad screen and a microphone and you're on the floor of the gym and they're all in the bleachers. There's environmental cues about what we do in this space, right? You talk to your friends, you make comments, you engage in that way. Then a classroom with desks and stationery, and you're sort of like in those versus, a boardroom. Yeah, I think it's really different. Yeah.
And then, I think people should be facing each other when you're having a meeting. It's really hard not to, I don't know. I used to go to faculty senate meetings all the time, and it was in this auditorium, raised auditorium, and it just, it felt so sterile and terrible. So I think your sense that meeting space matters is true. And I also think that when you have meetings in different spaces, you can also get some interesting behavior because you just sort of shake things up a little bit and you don't feel like you're in the same meeting, day after day. So yeah, that's good.
Yeah, and I think we just get environmental cues from all sorts of things. From if the agenda is in red, it says something to people. If it's a boardroom that looks like where important people meet, it says something to people. If it's a small room, it's it just says things. We could ignore that and it's still going to do those, or we can really be mindful and pay attention to that.
Right.
You mentioned the different purposes of meetings. I think one of the challenge is of limiting meetings, having fewer meetings, canceling meetings, inviting fewer people, which we're kind of encouraging, is this fear of not getting enough input or not getting enough input from the right people, or on the other side of a decision, people criticizing the decision. So we kind of include them along. So how do you suggest we balance gathering input and moving to making a decision?
Yeah, well, I think it depends on your culture, for sure, but how much consensus you have to reach. But there was Ann Hart, who was president of the University of Arizona several years ago, said something really profound to me that I've always remembered. And she said, gathering input is important, but it's not important forever. There comes this time when we need to make a decision. We need to decide, and that's when we make a decision. And if we learn that we've made a bad decision, then we can make a better decision. And this idea of sort of purposely making an suboptimal decision was not something, I don't know, for some reason I hadn't really thought about that before.
Yeah.
And I think that's what we do in higher ed all the time. We want to get things perfect
Yeah.
before we finish. And that's not how innovation happens. You go fast, you try something, it works or it doesn't work, and then you iterate and you do it again.
Yeah. You
And
learn.
so, pardon me?
You learn.
You
Learn right
learn.
away and make
Yeah.
adjustments. Yeah.
Yeah. The other thing that we do in higher ed so often is we make big decisions instead of a series of small decisions. And so often, by the time we've actually made the final decision, the need for the decision has passed. Right? Or the enterprise, information system we want to implement is now, no longer available to be purchased, and something else has been replaced, right? So we wait too long. And it's interesting, being in conversations and people are comparing university presidents, and there were two university presidents that in my world that were always being compared. One was quite methodical, and one was always like throwing up, 10 things, balls in the air, and then see what would work. And people were quite critical of the president who would try a bunch of things and expect things to fail. And I thought that was very interesting. But what was interesting is he got much more accomplished than the methodical president did because he just tried stuff. And so how do we communicate to people that we're going to try things? Things might not work, and we're okay with that. That's a hard message for people who are used to being very perfect.
Right. Yeah, you're reminding me of design thinking and how higher ed likes to have committees that meet for a year or two and do that. And in nonprofit worlds and corporate worlds, this pace of decision making and change and learning and iterating is so much faster. You don't try and come up with a perfect piece of software. You roll out something to your own staff, let them work with it, make it better. Then you roll it out to your current customers and get a lot of feedback and see what bugs happen, make it better, and then you improve it. Right? There's all this iteration along the way, and then it goes out to other folks, and you're improving and modifying along the way.
Right. But you asked an important question about how do you weigh, how much input. I think one thing that can be useful is to declare how long you're going to accept input. And so we're going to do it for 8 weeks, or we're going to do it for 3 months, but we're not going to, just because you want 2 years to study this, you don't get 2 years. We don't have time for that. We've got to take action, and people will mobilize and act quickly. The other thing that happens in decision making, and again, this is very higher ed centric, I suppose, is that the way decisions get made are not always clear. Right. So I'll say I want a new policy. Some universities have really great, and colleges, universities have really great guides for the policy making process, but a lot don't. And so you have to talk to people, say, how does this actually go, and who has to be consulted, and who has an opinion versus decision making authority, et cetera. And so the more we can codify the way decisions get made, the less time we can waste, and the faster we can move.
Yeah. And just the transparency. This is who's going to make decision. Is it me? Is it the group? Is it consensus? Is it not? And here's how we're going to do it. And these are the boundaries, and these are the limitations. It's going to be an 8-week process. We're deciding at the end of the meeting, whatever that might be. I think people, when they know that ahead of time, it really helps not only feel better about the process, but also know, okay, I've got 8 weeks. If I have anything important to say, I've got to think about it, figure it out in that time frame. And so I do have time to sit back and learn a little bit and read and listen to other opinions before I really offer. But if that's not the case, then maybe I do need to speed up. So I think it helps the individuals also manage themselves in that process.
But Keith, I want to just build on something you said, which was really knowing how the decision is going to be made. Because, and you've probably seen this in your career or talked to people who've had this experience, people serve on a search committee, for example, and they say, our committee committee comes together, they have 3 finalists, they say, this is the top finalist, and the president or the provost or whoever chooses someone different. Right. And they're like, no, you charged us to be on the search committee, and we told you who was the best candidate, and you ignored our advice. And so where things go better is when search committees are told right up front, I'm going to be asking you to send me perhaps 3 people. There are pros and cons, but I will be making the final decision.
Right.
Because otherwise people just get really angry when they feel like their decisions
Mhm.
were, their recommendations were ignored.
Yeah. So having a process, being transparent about it, and then
Mhm.
following it. I think that's one of the things this is where colleges get in trouble with policy. They have a policy and then they don't follow it.
You don't follow it. That's
Right.
right. That's
And
right.
so bringing that in.
Yeah.
I think one of the things that comes up is, well, we have this on the calendar. We have these meetings on the calendar. And I just think whatever y'all use for calendars, whether it's Google or Teams or whatever, it's pretty sophisticated. Like, you can cancel meetings, right? You don't
Yeah.
have to send a memo out to
Right,
everybody.
right.
You can adjust them from 60 minutes to 45. You
Mhm.
can uninvite people, right? Just because someone is invited to most of the weekly meetings, you can say, we don't have anything relevant to you this week, so we're going to uninvite you. Here's
Mhm.
this gift of time back. So I just think, remember that the tools we have around meetings now allow us to be more nimble, more flexible, a little bit more to make sure that this meeting is the way we want it and this meeting is the way we want it. We don't have to sort of say, well, we meet for 90 minutes every Monday afternoon, and so we're stuck with that. We can
Right,
use these
exactly.
tools to be more nimble.
Yeah, yeah.
As we were talking about having the conversation, you offered a few powerful questions to discuss and offer. And I think these are not really questions for you, but these are questions you're inviting folks to think about. And so I'll share all four of them,
Okay.
and feel free to take them up wherever you want and run with them. But the questions that you're offering is, why is it worth the time to invest in your people?
Mhm.
Who is wasting your time, and why are you letting them?
Mhm.
What is consuming your time but adding very little value? And what happens when our time is spent on activities that bring us no joy?
Mhm.
And I think these are really, and I'm trying to say them quickly, even though they're on the screen in front of me, so that they can settle with folks and people can sort of notice what resonates with you, what sounds juicy to you, what sounds, oh no, I don't want to think about that,
Mhm, mhm,
which some
mhm.
of these evoke in me. You want to say a little bit more about these?
Sure. Well, maybe start with the first one, which is why is it worth the time to invest in your people?
Mm,
And, one of the things that I learned through my executive coaching often is that people in big roles are busy,
mhm.
and um, they're really very often very outcomes focused, very task oriented. And the people stuff seems like it's just taking time,
A luxury.
a luxury. And it's interesting. I was talking to someone recently, and he'd gotten some feedback about his leadership, and the feedback was that he was kind of cold and aloof, standoffish, and it was charming. And I thought that the man that I'm talking to, that doesn't line up with this guy that I
Mhm.
see. And he said, "Oh, I get that feedback all the time." I said, "Where does it come from?" He's like, "I'm busy. I'm busy." And he said, "And actually, I don't care about your dog or your kids. I've got work to do." And I said, "Okay, fair enough." But I said, and small talk is just so, it's just so unproductive. And he said, "Exactly." And I said, "It doesn't yield anything except trust, knowledge of what people are going through, some context for people's challenges." And he said, "Oh, oh."
Mm.
So, we talked about, could he spend just a few minutes checking in, and what that might yield in ways that he had never imagined before.
Mhm.
So that's, one way to think about it. But the other way to think about it is when we're talking about time and trying to use time strategically, what could other people be doing that we don't have to do? But it takes a minute, or it takes a few minutes, or takes some time to help people learn how to do what we need
Yeah.
them to do. And I appreciate that we're so busy. It's so hard to take the time,
Mhm.
but it's such a good investment of time.
Mhm. But it does take time to delegate, right? It's not a
It
magic
does.
solution. Yeah.
Yeah, 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 yeah. But I'm working with an organization right now that's got a lot of super complex process, really so complex. And I said, I'm sure you got it this way for a reason, but it just doesn't, it seems crushing the way they designed it. And I said, I'm curious about why you haven't challenged the status quo here and said, this is not good, we should change it. And the person said, we don't have time to do that. We're so busy, we don't have time to make it easier. And sometimes we just have to say, we're going to stop, because to what end do we keep doing work that's so much harder than it needs to be? And it takes time to do process mapping and look for ways to streamline. But if you can take a process that takes 126 steps, which I have seen before, and take it down to 12, I mean, think of all the time you can free up to do things that are so much more strategic.
Well, and particularly when down the line, there might be 50 or 80 people going through that process. So you're not just freeing it up one time. These processes are the impact is multiplied out. So you could be saving yourself, 1,000 hours, and all of those people's productivity and time and engagement, or just a minute to breathe and think. I mean, one of the things in my coaching is so many leaders say that these conversations are so wonderful. It's the only time I have to think. I'm in meetings, I'm going, I'm responding to emails, I'm responding to phone calls, I'm responding to texts. I don't have time to just think. And when I share that with people, so many people resonate. I don't have time to think about this process, or what could it be, or what could it do, and opening some of that up.
Yeah. So another of the questions was, who is wasting your time and why are you letting them? So Keith, I'm going to invite you to answer that question.
Who is wasting my time? I'm fortunate. I work on my own. So me, I'm the one, right? Most of my, I remember Peter Magolda in a session talking about balance, and everybody's complaining about their time and they don't have enough time, and particularly faculty and scholars. And Peter Magolda was sort of the mentor in the room, and he sort of nodded his head and he said, yep, I experience all of that. And then he said, and I've come to realize that most of that is self-inflicted. And everybody just went, oh, you're right. So the people who are wasting my time is me. And it goes back to the 22-hour pinata, making things more complicated than they need to be, or focused on the wrong things, and getting to the end of my morning and thinking I was super busy, but why was I working on that? That wasn't nearly as important as these other things. But I get caught up in responding to emails too quickly and putting off important things, because it'll just take 30 seconds, but 200 times. And now that's a lot of actual time.
It is. Yeah. Traveling or something, and I can't look at email very much. So often the problems get resolved by the end of the day. I never had to weigh in.
Yes. So just a little break, a little pause, a little letting it be can really be helpful, for sure.
Yeah. Especially with the people who, maybe, I don't want to say waste your time, but are high need. The faster you respond, the faster they're going to ask for the next thing. And so a little bit of space can be really useful.
Well, yeah. And I think a lot of people feel like I get too many emails, and so I've got to respond to them. Well, what happens when you respond to emails?
You get more emails.
You get more.
I know.
So slow down. You don't have to be unresponsive or hyper responsive, right? There's some middle ground there.
Yeah. It's even interesting you say that. I mean, I like to be responsive, but when you respond immediately, it does suggest that you've got nothing else to do but respond to your email. And so people get used to that. And then when it takes you a couple of hours or longer, then they get mad at you.
Right.
So, part of this is sort of training other people how to work with us, right?
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
Yep.
Go ahead. Sorry.
Well, I was just saying, it was what you talked about before. Here's the process, and let's be transparent about it. We can think about that for meetings and processes, but also here's me, here's how I work, here's what you can expect from me, here's what you can expect from me. It's hard for me to do this. You can count on me to do this. And setting that up can be super helpful.
Yeah. I mean, just one small thing, and this is so obvious, but people don't do it, is using the appropriate subject line in the email. So, other day I got an email. It was, on this topic. So I'm like, oh, we're not doing that now, so I'll look at it later. And then I only to learn it was content for a very important meeting that was coming up, it
Yeah.
never would have occurred to me
Right.
to look there.
Yeah.
And so, you know, when you're trying to, when you get, you know, hundreds of emails every day, if people could just sort of use some email etiquette or
Yeah.
hygiene, perhaps,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
just put, you know, your review needed, or just for FYI, or be very clear about the topic, it just makes everybody's lives easier.
Yeah, for sure. Well, you turned it on me and we got down, but who is wasting your time and why are you letting them? And then what is consuming your time but adding very little value? What do you hope will evoke in people in reflecting on these questions?
Well, I think it's always good to do time log studies of yourself every once in a while.
Yeah.
And you made this comment, Keith, about you think I'm just going to write a 30-second email. And often it'll take, I find myself, I'll think, oh, just be fast. And it's 15 minutes later and the time is gone. Right.
Same.
So I think just being really aware of how you're spending your time is certainly super important. But really, what are you trying to accomplish? And if I know what I'm really trying to, the most important things, what are the critical few things I need to do in order to get there? And trying not to be distracted by all the other things. But I think, you know, if you don't like to disappoint people, it's hard. I just want to acknowledge that. Yeah. But I think that when we are spending a lot of time on things that bring us no joy, we're not good at anything. Right? We're emotionally depleted. We don't have energy. We lose enthusiasm. We're not doing anything that would, you know, helps us be innovative. And so, several years ago, I was in a group of my leadership team, and we were talking about the work that we really like and the work that we really don't like. And one of the people said, "Oh, I don't like to deal with people when they're mad. I get so stressed." And another person said, "I love that. I think of it as a game. I want to make them my friend. I want to talk them down." And so we just started making this process where someone really angry called, they got referred to Joan. That's what we did. And she was happy. Everybody else was happy. And so we're not all going to be good at all the same things.
Right.
So why not acknowledge that and give people work to do that they're good at and then they love. And then they'll be even better at what they do.
Yeah. Well, it's a strength-based approach, right? Like, what do you love to
Exactly.
do? What's the way? Let's help you do that more often and learn about each other so that the team is effective as possible. So we don't have Keith doing 15 things of which he's only actually very good at 3 or 4.
Yeah.
And the rest of it's draining energy. And productivity, innovation, clear thinking, good decisions, but also openness to diversity and engaging in healthy conflict. So many important things there. But it also reminds me of that, but organizationally. So a campus that I worked with has shared that they had everyone in their student affairs division map out every month of the year and how busy their unit was.
Okay.
And everybody just sort of did it independently. And then they shared that with everybody. You could sort of see they did it in these beautiful little dials. You could sort of see this office is super busy in April and May, and June and July are less. So they pick up a little bit in August, but not really until the middle of September. And it just really helped with a lot of collaboration because they all had stories about how busy they were, and they had stories about how busy everybody else was. And so I might not reach out to collaborate with you because you must be super busy. I just think so. And so I don't want to bother you. When in reality, that might not be the case for you. And then, of course, they found some folks thought they were over busy all the time. That's a different problem and one we have to engage in. But I think just sort of noticing and being aware of what other individuals are bringing and not bringing, what's hard, what's not hard. And then also other organizations. I think there's a lot of siloing with great intentions. I just don't want to bother you. I just don't want to, I don't want to intrude. I know you're doing such important work, or I know you're so busy. And I think that gets in the way of a lot of good collaboration.
Did they change their process after? Did they change something as a result of learning about that?
Yeah, it just helped. I mean, everybody thought everybody was super busy in August because many student affairs units are getting ready for students to come and training and things like that. But there are a lot of units that couldn't. And so you could say, okay, I know those folks are really busy, but we're kind of in the preparing. And so, hey, let's connect about that thing that happens in December when the lead up to December is really hard for both of us. So let's collaborate on that now. We can do that. Or, oh, I had no idea. The flu season really hits the health and medical center. Of course, I wouldn't have thought of that, but okay, good to know. All right, how do we spread some of this out?
Yeah. The other thing is I talk to people a lot about is just how do you, if you can, use your own calendar that's aligned with your body rhythms. Right?
Mm,
And it's not always possible. I want to acknowledge that. Some people don't have a
mhm,
lot of flexibility, but if you have the ability to work very intensely in the morning for, like, I'm a morning person. So if I can
mhm,
have a few hours in the morning, I can be amazing. But if I start meetings at, really early, I'm just okay because I
mhm,
don't think, I'm not as crisp a thinker later in the day as I am in the morning.
mhm,
So I try to
mhm.
schedule my calendar that way.
Yeah, that's great. And that's self-awareness and then self-management, right? And I know
Mhm.
this about myself. I think a lot of people say, "Oh, I'm not a morning person," and then
Right.
they don't do anything about it.
Mhm, mhm,
Right? Or
mhm,
this is a time where I'm just not at my best, and but they're not sort of managing that.
mhm, mhm.
This has been awesome. We've gone all sorts of places I never expected we would go, but we are running out of time. And this podcast is called Student Affairs Now. So we always like to end with this question: what are you thinking about, or troubling, or pondering now? Might be related to what we've talked about, might be unrelated. There's something that is with you now. And if you want to share where folks can connect with you, that would be great as well. So, what are you troubling now?
What I've been troubling and pondering.
Mm,
So I just made a big life move. I just moved from Tucson, Arizona to Iowa City uh, over the weekend. And
mhm,
so it is a time for me of brand new beginnings after 27 years in the same city. And so I'm
mm,
thinking about how to be very intentional about growing a new set of friends and a network, and wanting
community.
to be strategic about it and wanting to be with really good people, but wanting to be thoughtful about how to do that. And
Mhm,
it's sometimes a gift to have this sort of clean slate.
mhm.
And I think about it for other people as like other people in our lives that used to serve us but aren't really serving us now. Am I on a board that's not bringing me joy? Am I doing
Yeah.
volunteer work that's not so great? Am I on a softball team that used to be fun but it's really not?
Mhm.
How do we shed that and sort of break up with our past to have emerge anew? And so that's what
Yeah,
I've been thinking about. Yeah. So
I love that. And congratulations, because folks who are watching can see that you've just moved and you have a beautiful color coded bookcase behind you. So
and boxes everywhere else in the
you're
house.
doing
Yeah.
great. You're doing great. And I think one of the things that I mentioned to my coaching clients a lot, when you move to a new city or you start a new job, as grown-ups, we don't get a lot of fresh starts.
Uh-huh.
And so take full advantage of it. You know,
Yeah.
have what new habits do you want to leave behind?
Yes,
Start.
yes,
What
yes.
habits do you want to leave behind? You're in a new home, new
Right.
cues, new environment, new route to the grocery store.
Mhm.
What kind of fresh starts do you want to have? So take
Yeah,
advantage
that's
of
right.
that fresh start.
Yeah. And I'm on LinkedIn. That's probably the best way to reach me. Other things too, but that's probably the best way to start. Okay.
Awesome.
Thank you so much for
Well,
this invitation, Keith. I really appreciate it.
thanks for the conversation and being thoughtful and playful along the way. I really, really appreciate it. It's been terrific. Thanks to for your leadership and your writing, and thanks for joining me today. Uh,
Thanks.
Thanks to our sponsors of today's episode, Simplicity. Simplicity is the global leader in student services technology platforms with state-of-the-art technology that empowers institutions to make data-driven decisions specific to their goals. A true partner to the institution, Simplicity supports all aspects of student life, including but not limited to career services and development, student conduct and well-being, student success, and accessibility services. To learn more, visit Simplicity or connect with them on Facebook, Twitter, and LinkedIn. As always, a huge shout out to our producer, Nat Ambrosi, who was also at the University of Arizona for some time, who does all of the behind the scenes work to make us look and sound good. We love the support for these important conversations from our community. You can help us reach even more folks by subscribing to our podcast, YouTube, and weekly newsletter announcing each new episode and more. If you're so inclined, you can also leave us a 5-star review. I'm Keith Edwards. Thanks again to our fabulous guest today, Allison Vaillancourt, and to everyone who's watching and listening. Please make it a great week. Thank you.